Imagine a pharaoh so mysterious that even death couldn't silence the whispers around him. His tomb was feared, his story clouded in curses, and his very name erased from Egypt's records. For centuries, historians debated, who was he really? And why did his legacy seem more dangerous than any other ruler of the Nile? What if I told you that modern science, through the power of DNA testing, has finally cracked open this enigma, revealing a shocking truth about the so-called cursed pharaoh? The pharaoh lost to time. The sands of Egypt have swallowed many secrets, but few are as haunting as the tale of the cursed pharaoh. His burial chamber, discovered in fragments, bore strange inscriptions warning of death to any who disturbed his rest. Ancient workers whispered of plagues and misfortune tied to his name. Later, when archaeologists stumbled upon relics connected to him, accidents and mysterious illnesses seemed to follow. But the strangest thing wasn't the curse. It was the erasure. His cartouches, royal name markers, had been chiseled away. Temples once built in his honor were defaced. In an empire obsessed with eternity, this pharaoh was deliberately forgotten. Why? The power struggles of ancient Egypt. To understand this enigma, we must return to Egypt's 18th dynasty, one of its most powerful and turbulent eras. This was the age of golden wealth, of towering temples, and of radical reforms that split the kingdom apart. Historians long suspected that the cursed pharaoh might belong to this lineage. It was an era filled with intrigue, pharaohs who declared themselves gods, rulers who upended centuries of tradition, and successors who desperately tried to erase them from history. The most controversial among them was Akhenaten, the so-called heretic pharaoh, who defied Egypt's polytheistic tradition by worshipping a single god, Aten, the sun disk. Akhenaten's reign shattered old beliefs and left the priesthood furious. Could the cursed pharaoh have been connected to him? Unearthing the mystery tomb. In the Valley of the Kings, archaeologists stumbled upon a peculiar tomb, KV 55. Unlike the grand resting places of Ramses or Seti, this chamber was unfinished, crude, and oddly assembled. Inside lay a desecrated coffin with a broken face mask, suggesting someone had tried to erase the deceased's identity. Even stranger, the body inside was in terrible condition. The bones were fragile, the face distorted, the remains hastily buried. Early examination sparked wild theories. Some claimed the mummy was cursed, others said it carried signs of violent death. For decades, the debate raged. Was this Akhenaten himself? Was it his brother, Smenkhare, a shadowy figure who briefly ruled? Or was it someone else entirely? Science enters the tomb. In the 21st century, technology offered something no ancient curse could stop: DNA analysis. Egyptian researchers, working alongside international teams, took samples from the KV-55 mummy. Their goal? To trace the pharaoh's lineage and finally put an end to centuries of speculation. What they discovered was shocking. The DNA revealed that the cursed pharaoh was directly linked to one of Egypt's most famous rulers, Tutankhamun, the boy king whose golden mask is recognized around the world. But the connection was more than symbolic. The mysterious KV-55 mummy was Tutankhamun's father. A web of incest and illness. This revelation opened another dark chapter. DNA studies also exposed the tangled genetic web of Egypt's royal family. Generations of sibling marriages had left their bloodline riddled with inherited disorders. Tutankhamun himself suffered from a club foot, cleft palate, and fragile health, conditions likely passed down from his cursed father. The man in KV-55 had skeletal abnormalities too, suggesting that the pharaoh's own body bore the marks of this royal practice. It seemed the curse wasn't supernatural at all, it was written in the very genes of Egypt's rulers. Was the cursed pharaoh Akhenaten? With the DNA confirming the KV-55 mummy as Tutankhamun's father, many scholars argued this must be Akhenaten. The timing fit, the religious upheaval fit, and the erasure of his name from history fit. After all, Akhenaten had tried to replace Egypt's entire pantheon with his worship of the sun disk, a revolution so despised that later rulers destroyed his monuments and banished his memory. But not everyone agrees. Some argue the body in KV-55 was too young to be Akhenaten, who ruled for 17 years. Others suggest it was his brother, Smenkhare, a mysterious co-regent who may have briefly worn the crown. The debate is fierce, and the DNA raised as many questions as it answered. Underscore 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 underscore. The curse explained? So, was the pharaoh really cursed, or was the curse nothing more than bad genetics and political propaganda? For centuries, accidents and misfortunes tied to his tomb fueled the myth of supernatural vengeance. But modern science points to a more human explanation: power struggles, disease, and deliberate erasure. Still, one question lingers: why was his burial so rushed, so desecrated, so filled with fear? The DNA solved part of the mystery but deepened another. If the KV-55 mummy was Tutankhamun's father, and possibly Akhenaten, then why was he buried in disgrace? What secret was so dangerous that his enemies tried to wipe him out of history itself? In Part 2, we'll dive into the political chaos of Akhenaten's reign, the radical religious revolution he sparked, and how his downfall may have doomed his entire bloodline. The rise of a heretic. If the KV-55 mummy was indeed Akhenaten, then his story begins not with curses, but with rebellion against tradition. Born Amenhotep IV, he ascended to the throne during the golden age of Egypt's 18th dynasty. His father, Amenhotep III, had ruled in splendor, expanding Egypt's wealth and prestige. But the young pharaoh was different. Instead of continuing the worship of Egypt's many gods, Ammonius, Osiris, Isis, Horus, he turned his devotion to a single deity, Aten, the sun disk. To him, Aten wasn't just another god, but the only god, radiating life to all creation. This was radical, even dangerous. Egypt had thrived on polytheism for over 1,000 years. By denying the old gods, Akhenaten wasn't just changing religion, he was dismantling the foundation of Egyptian society itself. Revolution in the desert. Akhenaten's reforms went beyond words. He ordered the construction of a brand new capital city, Akhenaten, horizon of the Aten, built in the desert at modern-day Amarna. Here, he envisioned a utopia where worship of the sun disk would replace the mighty temples of Ammonius. The art of his reign reflected this revolution. Gone were the stiff, godlike depictions of pharaohs. Instead, Akhenaten was shown with elongated features, a round belly, and tender gestures with his wife, Queen Nefertiti, and their daughters. For some, this was refreshing, a glimpse of humanity in the divine. For others, it was blasphemy. The priests of Ammonius, stripped of power and wealth, seethed with rage. Generals and scribes, loyal to the old ways, whispered in discontent. Enemies in the shadows. Akhenaten's obsession with Aten consumed him. While he focused on religious reforms, Egypt's empire began to weaken. Reports from foreign vassals, pleas for soldiers, warnings of invasions, were ignored. To many, it seemed the pharaoh had abandoned his duties as ruler for the role of prophet. Inside Egypt, resentment grew. Temples once bustling with life were abandoned. Statues of gods were smashed. Offerings ceased. The powerful priesthood of Ammonius, once the backbone of Egypt's spiritual life, was humiliated. It was only a matter of time before enemies, both inside and outside the palace walls, plotted for his downfall. The shadow of Nefertiti. By Akhenaten's side stood one of history's most enigmatic women, Queen Nefertiti. Together, they ruled not only as king and queen, but as co-prophets of Aten. Her image, as famous as the bust that survives in Berlin today, represented beauty, power, and divine favor. Some records suggest Nefertiti may have taken an even greater role in government as Akhenaten's reign wore on. Did she support his vision, or quietly scheme to preserve her family's survival as Egypt turned against them? Later whispers claimed she might have even ruled after his death under another name. But if so, why did she vanish from history just as abruptly as her husband? The collapse of a dream. Toward the end of Akhenaten's reign, the cracks could no longer be ignored. Egypt's economy suffered, its military power waned, and its people grew restless. The grand city of Akhenaten, meant to be eternal, began to look like a symbol of failure. Then, the pharaoh died, suddenly, and under mysterious circumstances. Some accounts suggest disease. Others whisper assassination. Whatever the truth, his radical experiment collapsed with him. Without his authority, the worship of Aten crumbled. The priests of Ammonius rose again, determined to erase every trace of Akhenaten's revolution. Temples of Aten were destroyed. His statues were smashed. His name was chiseled off monuments. The man who had tried to redefine divinity was condemned to eternal oblivion. The question of succession. But what about his bloodline? This is where the mystery deepens. Akhenaten's death left Egypt in chaos. Who would rule after him? Some records point to a shadowy figure named Smenkhare, possibly a younger brother or co-regent, who may have briefly taken the throne. Others suggest Nefertiti herself assumed power under another royal name. What is certain is that a young boy eventually inherited the crown, Tutankhamun, later known as Tutankhamun. And with his rise, the old gods returned. The boy king restored the worship of Ammonius, moved the capital back to Thebes, and tried to heal the wounds left by his father's heresy. But even Tutankhamun's reign was short and tragic, leaving behind more questions than answers. The desecrated burial. If Akhenaten was indeed the KV-55 mummy, his enemies showed him no mercy in death. His coffin was deliberately vandalized, his face mask hacked apart, his name erased. His burial was rushed, unworthy of a pharaoh. The once revered king who had dared to defy the gods was now treated like a criminal, cast into a tomb barely fit for royalty. This disgrace mirrored the hatred Egypt's rulers felt for him. For them, Akhenaten wasn't just a failed leader, he was a heretic whose memory had to be purged forever. But here's the twist: DNA evidence centuries later revealed that this despised pharaoh, whether Akhenaten or his brother, was the father of Tutankhamun, the golden boy king whose tomb dazzled the modern world. So how did the bloodline of a cursed heretic continue through Egypt's most famous ruler? And what secrets did their genes hide about their downfall? In Part 3, we'll uncover the genetic puzzles inside Tutankhamun's family tree, the incest, the deformities, and the diseases that may have been the true curse of Egypt's last great dynasty. A family tree of shadows. When DNA evidence revealed that the KV-55 mummy, whether Akhenaten or Smenkhare, was the father of Tutankhamun, scientists faced another mystery: who was Tutankhamun's mother? Egyptologists had long speculated it might be the famous Nefertiti, but the DNA told another story. Tutankhamun's mother was not Nefertiti at all, but a woman referred to as the Younger Lady, a mummy discovered in tomb KV-35. Here's where it gets even darker. The Younger Lady was not just any royal wife, she was Akhenaten's sister. This meant Tutankhamun was the child of full siblings. The curse in the bloodline. Ancient Egypt's royal family practiced sibling marriage to preserve divine blood. Pharaohs claimed they were living gods, so they avoided marrying outside the royal line. But what they saw as sacred union, modern science reveals as genetic disaster. The DNA of Tutankhamun showed the result. He suffered from a cleft palate and a clubfoot that made walking difficult. He had necrosis, bone death, in his left foot, forcing him to rely on walking sticks, many of which were found in his tomb. His body carried traces of malaria, suggesting repeated infections. These conditions weren't random. They were the price of generations of incest. In truth, the so-called curse of Tutankhamun and his father may not have been supernatural at all. It was written in their DNA. Rewriting Tutankhamun's image. For decades, popular culture portrayed Tutankhamun as a healthy, radiant boy king who died young in glory. But science has stripped away the golden mask to reveal a fragile child plagued by deformities and disease. His DNA revealed he could barely walk, and CT scans of his mummy showed fractures in his leg, possibly from a fall that never healed. Combined with malaria, this could explain his sudden death at just 19 years old. The tragedy of Tutankhamun wasn't just his youth, it was that his destiny was doomed before he was even born. The pharaoh's walking sticks. Among the treasures in Tutankhamun's tomb were over 130 walking sticks, once dismissed as ceremonial objects. But paired with DNA evidence, they tell a heartbreaking story. The boy king may have leaned on them daily just to move around. The golden throne that showed him standing tall beside his queen now looks like propaganda, hiding the truth of a ruler whose body was failing him. Even in death, his fragile bones struggled to survive the centuries. His mummification was botched, perhaps rushed, leaving his body charred and broken. The web of intermarriage. DNA analysis didn't just reveal Tutankhamun's deformities. It mapped out a wider web of incest across Egypt's 18th dynasty. His father, KV-55, was married to his own sister, the Younger Lady. His grandparents, Amenhotep III and Queen Tai, were also closely related. Generations of sibling marriages compounded genetic weaknesses. By Tutankhamun's time, the dynasty was collapsing, not only politically, but biologically. Science meets the curse. For centuries, explorers and archaeologists spoke of a curse surrounding Tutankhamun's tomb, linking the deaths of those who entered it to supernatural vengeance. But DNA evidence tells another story: the true curse was hereditary. Tutankhamun's weakened body was the result of choices made by his ancestors to keep power within the family. The KV-55 mummy, his father, likely suffered too. Skeletal analysis showed fragile bones and possible deformities, signs of the same inherited conditions. The curse wasn't magic. It was blood. The shattered legacy. If KV-55 was Akhenaten, then history played a cruel trick. The man who dared to change Egypt's gods left behind a dynasty so weakened by inbreeding that it couldn't endure. His son, Tutankhamun, became a tragic symbol, remembered not for his reign, but for his glittering tomb, sealed by accident rather than glory. But one question remained: why was the KV-55 mummy buried in disgrace, while Tutankhamun was given a golden resting place that dazzled the modern world? The answer lies not in science, but in politics. DNA unraveled the truth about Tutankhamun's health and family, But the deeper mystery remains: why was the father erased, while the son was celebrated? In Part 4, we'll dive into the politics of memory, why Akhenaten's legacy was destroyed, how Tutankhamun's image was carefully reshaped, and what modern science finally revealed about the cursed pharaoh's true identity. The politics of memory. In ancient Egypt, memory was power. To be remembered was to live forever, while to be erased was the ultimate punishment. For Akhenaten, if indeed he is the KV-55 mummy, his enemies condemned him to the latter. After his death, Egypt's rulers unleashed a campaign of destruction. His name was hacked out of monuments. His temples were demolished. His grand capital, Akhenaten, was abandoned to the desert. His image was cursed, his reforms denounced as heresy. To the priests of Ammonius and the rulers who followed, Akhenaten wasn't just a failed king. He was a danger to Egypt's soul. Tutankhamun, the golden heir. Yet his son, Tutankhamun, received the opposite treatment. Though frail in life and short-lived as a king, Tutankhamun became a useful symbol for those who wanted to restore the old ways. During his reign, the boy king abandoned the name Tutankhaten, living image of Aten, and became Tutankhamun, living image of Ammonius. His court worked tirelessly to erase his father's revolution. Tutankhamun was portrayed as the restorer of tradition, the child of the gods who healed Egypt after chaos. Ironically, his fame in modern times would eclipse even the greatest pharaohs, because his tomb, small and hidden, escaped the plunderers of time. A tale of two burials. Here lies the cruel irony: the father, Akhenaten, was buried in disgrace, his coffin vandalized and his memory condemned. The son, Tutankhamun, was buried with treasures that stunned the world. The contrast wasn't accidental. It was the result of political strategy. By glorifying the son, Egypt's rulers ensured the father's heresy remained buried. But DNA, centuries later, exposed their link. The so-called cursed pharaoh and the golden boy king were bound by blood. The curse revisited. So what of the curse that so fascinated explorers? When Tutankhamun's tomb was opened in 1922, sudden deaths of those involved were blamed on ancient magic. Newspapers fueled the legend of a supernatural curse. Yet the truth may be more mundane. Science suggests mold and bacteria sealed inside the tomb could have sickened those who entered. Combined with coincidence, myth grew into legend. But for the KV-55 mummy, the true cursed pharaoh, the curse was his own family line. DNA revealed the inbreeding, the diseases, the frailty passed down to his son. The curse wasn't written on walls. It was carved into chromosomes. The final revelation. Through DNA, science restored a forgotten pharaoh's identity. Whether Akhenaten or his brother, KV-55 was no nameless ghost. He was the father of Tutankhamun, the man whose revolution nearly broke Egypt, and whose disgrace haunted his descendants. In a way, the curse worked. His enemies erased him so thoroughly that only with modern science could his story resurface. For over 3,000 years, he lay silenced. Now, thanks to DNA, we know who he was. Legacy of the cursed pharaoh. Akhenaten's dream of one god failed, his family line collapsed, and his enemies triumphed. Yet in death, he achieved what he never could in life: immortality. His story continues to captivate us, not as a heretic erased, but as a riddle solved by science. Tutankhamun may have dazzled the world with gold, but Akhenaten, the cursed pharaoh, has left behind something more valuable, a reminder that even forgotten kings cannot hide from the truth written in their blood. And so, the mystery is solved. The cursed pharaoh wasn't a legend, nor just a curse. He was a man, a father, a heretic, and a king whose DNA still speaks across millennia. But here's the question for you: was Akhenaten a visionary ahead of his time, or a reckless ruler who doomed his dynasty?